Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a very quick review of a 90s action film classic to a lot of people. That, of course, are going to be reviewing 1992's Universal Soldier. This film was directed by Roland Emmerich. You probably know him for films like Independence Day, or more negatively, if you've seen films like Godzilla or Independence Day 2, the sequel that no one likes to talk about. This film primarily stars Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme at some of their heights in their careers. So I kind of went into this movie really not knowing too much about it. I reviewed this movie and saw it just because I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I was kind of interested in it because in general, I am very interested in a lot of science fiction, action movies, and of course, it has an actor that I really like. I obviously watched that movie. At least I tend to watch movies a lot more with actors I really do like. This in case, I really do like Jean-Claude Van Damme. I know that his acting abilities can be questionable in some of his movies, but this guy, you can arguably say was at the height of his career in the 90s. Dolph Lundgren, at this point, is still pretty high up in his career. He, of course, mainly known for Rocky IV. If you want to remember him for the Masters of the Universe movie, you obviously can do that. And of course, he's been in tons of stuff. So you have arguably two action stars that are close to the heights of their careers here. You have a brand new director, Roland Emmerich, who at the time he made this movie, he hadn't yet done films like disaster movies and Independence Day and all this, but this was really the movie that kick-started his big film career. If it wasn't for Universal Soldier and the success that this film brought, we probably would have never gotten films like Stargate, Independence Day, and of course other films he would eventually direct. And like I said before, it all started with this movie. And I was kind of curious to see what Roland Emmerich's really first major big budget Hollywood film looked like. And I heard some things about it, but not too much. And I went into this with basically a blank perspective. And I gotta say, to be honest here, it's really good. I totally see why a lot of people really like this movie and why it's beloved by a lot of people. It honestly grows on me the more and more I see scenes from it, watch it again. It's a very competently made, solid action movie with some interesting themes, ideas, concepts that I think the movie explores to a decent level. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this movie is like a perfect movie, like a 10 out of 10. There's some little minor problems I have it with here and there, but I think for the most part, this is a really great action movie. So like always, I'm going to kind of give you my pros, my cons, a little bit of a summary, concept, and my overall opinions on this movie at the end. Now, if you don't know what this movie is about and you're kind of curious, the basic gist of it, the basic selling point is that there's these soldiers called Universal Soldiers. These are basically enhanced soldiers that were previously deceased, brought back to life through genetic manipulation, given increased strength, increased abilities beyond, you can call them basically superhumans, but also comes at a cost. As a result, their bodies heat up too quickly. If they heat up too quickly, they will die. So these soldiers have to be constantly cooled down in freezer temperatures, and their minds are also pretty blank, and they're not able to be as responsive or as receptive as a normal human can. So like I said, there's pros and cons to being a universal soldier, so to speak. And at the beginning of the movie, it's basically premised that these guys are just really much, they're cyborgs. They're human cyborgs that are basically controlled and tracked by a secret part of the U.S. government. We follow the story of basically a story of the main character called Luke and Dolph Lundgren's character, who's a sergeant. And basically we get a flashback, and the movie sets this up that we basically get a flashback between these two characters Dolph Lundgren's character is frankly going crazy. He's killing people, innocent civilians, out of a village during the Vietnam War that had already been cleared. Luke tries to stop him, but they end up both killing each other, and then they get both revived as Universal soldiers. And you kind of, like I said, kind of already see the hints of the story coming out. Basically, Luke is getting more and more memories coming back to him. More of his old subconscious and life is starting to come back alongside Dolph Lundgren's character. It all kind of comes to a head where Dolph Lundgren's character goes insane. And it doesn't help, like I said, the things that have happened to their bodies and their minds. In some weird way, psychologically, Dolph Lundgren's character believes that he's still in Vietnam. Everyone around him is gook, like I said, using the movie's terms, gook traitors, right? And he's got to eliminate them. And of course, he's also got to basically replay that scene that happened at the beginning of the movie, because that was the last point that they basically experienced as human beings before they died. So in a weird way, their brains have to relive that scene and complete it, which in this case would be forcing Luke to kill like I said, in this version, a gook traitor, but in this case, it'll be a completely new character, and, it's a female character, female reporter that Luke has developed an interest with. But basically reliving it psychologically, but in the future sense, in a lot of ways. Eventually, Luke wins, kills Dolph Lundgren's character, the sergeant, and that's the end of the movie. Now, that also kind of depends, too, which version of the movie you saw, because there was a deleted scene that had, frankly, a bonkers ending, where basically it was revealed that Luke's memories of his parents were implanted, they were fake, and this was all a big setup by the people who created the Universal Soldier program, and they're basically trying to kill him to wipe away their tracks and cover up their loose ends. They almost succeed in doing so, but then Luke survives. Eventually, he kind of grows old rapidly without the treatments and stuff to keep him alive. He chooses it of his own volition, and basically gets together with the female reporter character and, dies a happy life. Now, that was a deleted scene. Frankly, bizarre, wonky ending, but still wanted to mention it. So now it's, like I said, kind of a little bit of a quick summary. My quick thoughts and, of course, pros on this movie. For one, the acting is really good. Jean-Claude Van Damme, like I said, he's got a strong accent. Dolph Lundgren as well has a strong accent in this movie. But I think in a lot of weird ways, I think it works for their characters, because these guys are emotionally, they're emotionally damp people. Their emotions have been drained. Their personalities have been completely drained. It's like I said, throughout the film, they develop a little bit more and more personality, but it makes more sense. Like, these guys are basically zombies. They're human cyborgs. And I thought that all the actors who portrayed them, including the two main stars, portrayed us very well. They're very stilted and cold in their performances. During, firefights, they betray no emotion in their faces. It's not really, of course, until the end where Dolph Lundgren's character and Luke develop more and more of their personalities as their memories come back. But, like I said, it was very well acting all throughout the board, including the female reporter character, who I like her arc, and she was very well cast and bounces very well off the main lead, Luke's character, Jean-Claude Van Damme. So the acting was really good. The action is also really solid. There's a lot of great action sequences. I love the opening scene where we actually get to see the Universal Soldiers in action. Like I said, a really great example of show, don't tell. Very well done. I also like the vehicle scene at the end of the movie. It's really good stuff. I also like the final fight between the sergeant and Luke, between the two of them at the end. It's kind of rainy, cold, and muddy. And it was a really cool and very brutal and intense scene. It's really cool. All the action is very well directed. It's really solid. And it feels, like I said, it's a very well directed movie. The directing is really good. Roland Emmerich did a really good job, and it's one of the best, like I said, one of the best 90s action movies I frankly have seen. Now, there's not really too much, I think, of all, not really any CGI in this movie. Like I said, there could be for like computers and other stuff, but the look of the movie looks great. I like the locations. I like the little mobile van for the Universal Soldiers. It looks pretty cool. I even like the look of them. I like the little eye thing, with the radio and comm in them. Looks pretty cool. Like the military gear they're kind of sported with. I really like the design of the Universal Soldiers. I think the only thing I can really say is they could have went more further with the design, which, they absolutely could have, but that's, like I said, only a little small gripe. Still really like the look of them. Like I said, too, I also like the story quite a bit. There's a lot of deeper psychological elements of this movie, and the premise alone is really interesting. This idea of a universal soldier, they're basically human cyborgs, and, these are dead guys brought back to life, and, have these weird and interesting plot conveniences, like I said, with the whole heating up of their bodies, their super strength, but also they have to cool down, their memories, their personalities are completely drained, and basically throughout the movie, the idea of humans, regardless of how tampered or how interesting and deformed the mind can be, the mind always has a funny way of coming back to things, even though I do think the ending kind of twists out on its head. I do like the idea. This movie also kind of reminds me a lot of RoboCop in a lot of weird ways when I was watching it, because it kind of, like I said, Luke's character and the Sarge kind of go through a similar arc of sorts. But the more, like I said, I do think in RoboCop, it's more of a clear divide between machine and man. This is more of it's their past life and their stunted personalities and how much their bodies have changed since then. I did, like I said, like a lot of the psychological reasons for things and characters that are happening. I really do like the whole motivation with Sarge's character, where he's kind of this crazy, no holds bar, really insane psychopath character, and how these characters felt in their last interaction. In a weird way, subconsciously, their minds try to repeat that in a very weird and demented way. I really like that. It's a really interesting idea. It shows how war can affect people. Like I said, maybe a slight more under the surface theme here, but of how war can affect people, especially how war transitioning from being a veteran to going to the home, basically going to civilian life, how that drastic change, how do you deal with that psychologically? Some of those themes are kind of slightly touched upon here, and it was really well done. I also like the premise, the story, how the story progresses. I also like the female character. She was pretty cool. She went through a little arc from the movie. Like at the beginning of the movie, she's kind of seen as a little bit of a screw up, and then at the end, she kind of becomes more of a reporter, so to speak. And there's a lot of really funny scenes too that happen throughout the movie because, like I said, the Universal Soldiers are basically stunted people, and they're stunted human cyborgs. There's a lot of really funny scenes. I think the funniest one for me is when Luke, or Jean-Claude Van Damme's character, is in the diner and he keeps ordering food and he likes food. And someone's like, how are you going to pay for it? And he just keeps beating up people. That for me was really funny. And there's a lot of really funny scenes that also presented as well. And I do like the deeper psychological stuff that's happening here. I like how the film also ties back and shows us that Vietnam scene between the two characters when they were originally humans, and we see a repeat of that subconsciously in the future when they've become Universal Soldiers. That was really well done and really creative writing right there. But I do think, as much as I really like the psychological stuff, I do really wish that they went deeper with it, or maybe there was a little bit more psychologically they could have said about these people and their personalities and how war affects them. Like I said before, I think films like RoboCop honestly did this a little bit better. Now, like I said, I think this movie in a lot of ways with RoboCop is very similar, but I think RoboCop does execute the whole crisis of identity, memory, what it means to be human and stuff, a little bit more better and more interesting. And maybe also, like I said, the film is also set, that film at least is set in the far future, with a lot of social commentary and sarcasm and stuff. Well, this film doesn't necessarily have that, but like I said, that's not really its goal to be commentary and sarcasm and stuff. But, regardless, it's not a huge complaint. This film is still really solid, still has a very interesting story. It's a overall well-crafted movie. Now I'm going to get some of my cons. I already mentioned this, but like I said, I do think they should have went deeper into some of the themes of the story, psychological stuff, how war affects people, and the crisis of identity, what makes people people. Like I said, I feel like a film like RoboCop did that a little bit better and more interesting. But, like I said, not to hate on this movie too much. Like, this movie is really good, and I really enjoyed it. It's just, I think it's a weird case where, like I said, there was a movie that came out before that did this concept slightly better. But doesn't mean, like I said, it's not too much hate on this movie, because this movie still overall is very well crafted. I really also, like, in terms of other cons, I really can't really say too much in terms of things I can think of. I did think the romance between the female reporter and Luke was a little bit strange throughout the movie. And I'm going to be honest here, like, these two definitely had some moments that made me laugh. There's definitely chemistry there. I like these characters, but to me, the relationship felt a little bit weird, especially since, like I said, the Universal Soldier here, Luke, I can't really comprehend concepts like relationships and love quite yet. And it feels a little bit strange. It just, like I said, I did think that it was kind of a little bit out of nowhere. They could have made the relationship aspect of it a little bit more subtle, I guess you can call it. Like, it's hinting that they might become a thing, and she's developing feelings for him, and maybe he is slightly as well. But it could have been more subtle than it was presented in the movie. Which, in a lot of ways, too, if you look at that, deleted ending, they also address that. They become together officially and stuff. And I guess, like I said, I already mentioned this, but the deleted ending, it's not really a criticism on the movie. It's just kind of a weird ending. It's not, like, horrible, but I do think it's bizarre and out of place. I can totally see why it was cut. I do like aspects of it, especially with the whole happy ending. Luke's character finds his real parents, gets together with the female reporter, and dies a natural death of his choice. That was good. I didn't think the whole setup and the whole twist, I guess you can call it, was kind of bizarre. It does, like I said, there are some implications here. It talks about memories and all this kind of stuff. Maybe things were implanted in his subconscious. Those are themes that are interesting, but, like I said, I think the way the ending was done, it was so out of nowhere, it was so left field, and, like I said, the movie itself has an happy ending, at least the final cut. I think it does end kind of abruptly, but, I mean, maybe that was for the best, this is kind of a weird ending, but, like I said, I don't think it necessarily ruins the movie, but it's just kind of a weird ending, to say the least. But other than that, I don't really have too many complaints with this movie. It's a really well-rounded, solid action film from the 90s, has some great performances, great action scenes, great acting all around, and honestly, some really interesting concepts, and just in general, a really cool and interesting science fiction theme here and idea. If you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend Universal Soldier from the 90s. Maybe it's a little bit of a biased thing as well. Just in general, I like a lot of movies from the 90s. I just like a lot of films from that time period. But regardless, I do highly recommend this movie. It's really solid. But yeah, that's my review of Universal Soldier. All right, peace, y'all.